Every single day, thousands of tourists walk across the plaza in front of Petra's Treasury. They take their photos, they ride camels, they buy souvenirs, they look up at that massive pink sandstone facade carved into the cliff, and they feel like they are standing at the edge of history. What not one of those millions of visitors knew, what not one archaeologist had confirmed in 2 centuries of digging in this city, is that right beneath their feet, directly under the ground they were walking on, 12 people had been lying in the dark for 2,000 years, untouched, undiscovered, sealed inside a hidden chamber with everything they were buried with, waiting. And the discovery that finally found them did not just shock the archaeology world. It exposed a mystery about the ancient civilization that built Petra that nobody has been able to fully explain, and that scientists are still trying to unravel right now, in 2026, as the excavation season continues. This is the story of what they found, why it matters more than almost anything uncovered at Petra in the past 200 years, and why the archaeologist who opened that chamber said something that stopped the entire room cold. Let us start with the place, because you need to understand Petra before you can understand why this discovery is so extraordinary. Petra sits in the desert canyon landscape of southern Jordan, surrounded by mountains of rose-colored sandstone that glow in shades of pink, red, and orange depending on where the sun is in the sky. The ancient city was not built in the conventional sense. It was carved directly into the cliff faces, room after room, facade after facade, corridor after corridor, all cut by hand into solid rock by a civilization that had no right to be as advanced as they were, and yet somehow managed to build one of the most sophisticated cities in the ancient world in the middle of a desert. The people who built it were called the Nabataeans. They were originally a nomadic Arab people who had been moving across the desert for centuries before they chose this canyon as their home. At its peak, Petra was the capital of the Nabataean kingdom, which controlled trade routes connecting Arabia, Egypt, the Mediterranean world, and Asia. Incense, spices, silk, and luxury goods all passed through Petra. The wealth that generated paid for everything you see carved into those cliffs. The city grew to house somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 people at its height. It became one of the most cosmopolitan and most prosperous places in the ancient Near East, a trading hub that everyone wanted access to, and that the geography of its narrow canyon entrance made almost impossible to attack. The main entrance to Petra is through a narrow slot canyon called the Syke. It is less than 3 meters wide in places and over a kilometer long, with walls rising up to 80 meters on both sides. Walking through it, you feel like the rock is closing around you. And then, as you emerge from the end of the Syke, the canyon opens and the Treasury appears directly in front of you. There is no gentle introduction. It is just there, suddenly enormous, carved 40 meters into the cliff face, with columns and statues and intricate details that should not be possible in sandstone. It is called Al-Khazne in Arabic, which means the treasury of the pharaoh, a nickname that came from a folk legend, not from historical fact. Scholars today believe the treasury was most likely a monumental tomb, possibly built for Nabataean King Aratus IV, who ruled from roughly 9 BCE to 40 CE, though even that is not certain. The treasury's exact purpose has been debated for as long as archaeologists have been coming to Petra, and that uncertainty is precisely what makes the new discovery so significant. The discovery started not with a shovel, but with a machine. In 2024, a team of researchers from the American Center of Research, led by archaeologist Dr. Pierce Paul Kriesman, received rare permission from the Jordanian government to conduct a ground-penetrating radar survey of the area around and beneath the treasury. The original purpose of that survey had nothing dramatic about it on paper. The team wanted to assess the condition of the ground around the treasury's courtyard and the nearby plaza in advance of potential flood mitigation work. Petra's canyon location makes it vulnerable to flash floods, and water management in the area has been a long-standing concern. Geophysicist Professor Richard Bates from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland ran the ground-penetrating radar, essentially sending electromagnetic signals into the earth and reading what bounced back. What bounced back was not what anyone expected to find. The radar data showed clear anomalies beneath the plaza in front of the treasury, shapes and void spaces underground that matched the signature of buried chambers, the kind of patterns that, to an experienced geophysicist looking at the readout, have one meaning: something is down there. Bates and Kriesman looked at each other. Kriesman reached for his phone and called the Discovery Channel's Josh Gates, host of Expedition Unknown, to bring a film crew to the site. What followed was an excavation that was granted formal approval by Jordan's Department of Antiquities, and that would become the most significant find in Petra in more than 2 decades. The chamber they uncovered is approximately 5.5 meters long, 5.5 meters wide, and 2.7 meters high. It sits directly beneath the plaza in front of the treasury, the space where every tourist stands to photograph the facade, the place where thousands of people have walked every single day for years without any idea of what was underneath them. Inside, the team found 12 complete human skeletons. Men, women, and children, all of them still lying in their original positions, exactly as they had been placed when the chamber was sealed somewhere between the 1st century BCE and the early 2nd century CE. That date range, confirmed through luminescence dating, which tracks when mineral grains were last exposed to sunlight, means this tomb was created during the absolute peak of the Nabataean kingdom. These were not obscure outliers buried in a forgotten corner. They were placed in a chamber directly in front of the most important building in the entire city, in what would have been one of the most visible, most prestigious locations in all of Petra. Now here is the detail that made Josh Gates freeze when he saw it. Lying with one of the 12 skeletons was a ceramic vessel, a broken jug, positioned in a way that suggested the person had been holding it, or that it had been deliberately placed in their arms as part of the burial rite. When the dust was cleared away from it and the shape became visible, Gates later described what happened. He said when they spotted what looked like a chalice, all of them just froze. He said it looked nearly identical to the Holy Grail featured in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the movie filmed in front of the very same treasury that was now sitting directly above them. He called it the ultimate moment of life imitating art. To be precise, and archaeologists are always precise about this, the object is a broken ceramic jug, not a cup, and it does not grant eternal life. But the coincidence of finding a chalice-shaped vessel clutched by a skeleton in a sealed chamber directly beneath the building that Hollywood turned into the home of the Holy Grail is the kind of moment that makes even the most stone-faced scientist pause for a second. More than the Hollywood connection, what genuinely stunned the researchers was something more fundamental. In over 200 years of archaeological investigation at Petra, most of the tombs discovered at this site have been found completely empty, looted, cleared out, stripped of everything. Thousands of rock-cut tombs exist across Petra's cliffs and terrain, and the vast majority contain nothing. No bones, no objects, no grave goods. The combination of centuries of human activity and the straightforward fact that people have been breaking into tombs for as long as there have been tombs means that finding intact burials anywhere in Petra is extraordinarily rare. Finding 12 complete skeletons in their original positions, with grave goods still present, in a chamber directly beneath the treasury, sealed for 2,000 years. Kriesman told reporters that in the 2 centuries that Petra has been investigated by archaeologists, nothing like this had been found before. Professor Bates used similar language. He called the discovery of international significance because very few complete burials from the early Nabataeans had ever been recovered from Petra before. And then he said the line that captures why this matters. He said the burials, their goods, and the human remains can all be expected to help fill the gaps in our knowledge of how Petra came to be and who the Nabataeans were. That is the real mystery, not the chalice, not the Indiana Jones comparison, not the dramatic camera footage of scientists lowering themselves into a 2,000-year-old chamber. The real mystery is the Nabataeans themselves, because despite Petra being one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world, and despite the Nabataeans having built one of the most remarkable civilizations of the ancient world, we actually know surprisingly little about them as people. Their language, a form of Aramaic, we understand reasonably well. Their architecture obviously is written in stone across an entire city. Their trade networks, their economic power, their engineering capabilities, these can be reconstructed from the historical record. But their burial practices, their family structures, their genetic origins, their daily lives, the answers have been almost impossible to find because the physical remains of the Nabataean people themselves have barely ever been recovered. Most tombs were empty or disturbed. Skeletal material was fragmentary at best. Scientists have been studying the greatest city the Nabataeans ever built for over 2 centuries and have had almost no actual Nabataean human remains to study. That is the gap that 12 complete skeletons, articulated in their original positions, sealed in an intact chamber for 2,000 years, can begin to fill. Kriesman explained the significance of what articulated means in this context. He said the bones have not been rummaged around and moved. They are in the positions the bodies were placed in at the time of burial. That is exceedingly rare, and it is what makes this scientifically valuable beyond anything a looted or disturbed tomb could ever offer. When bones are still in their original positions, you can read how the body was placed. Were the arms folded? Were the legs extended? Was the person lying on their back or their side? These details are not just interesting, they are the vocabulary of burial practice, and burial practice is one of the most direct expressions of a culture's beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the social order. The grave goods recovered alongside the skeletons are also telling a story. Bronze objects, iron objects, and ceramic artifacts were found in the chamber alongside the 12 bodies. The team believes that textile wrappings, jewelry, and beadwork that would typically be found in Nabataean burials were likely lost over the centuries to humidity and to the floodwaters that periodically seeped into the sandstone. Petra's sandstone is porous in the way that a sponge is porous, and moisture working its way into an underground chamber over 2,000 years will destroy organic material while leaving bone relatively intact. What survived is what could not be dissolved. Now consider the location of this tomb one more time. Being buried directly in front of the Treasury, the most prominent and likely most sacred structure in all of Petra, was not something that happened by accident. This was not a common burial ground. This was a place of honor. The individuals inside that chamber were placed there deliberately in one of the most visible and prestigious locations in the Nabataean capital, with grave goods that indicate they were people of standing in the society that buried them. Lead archaeologist Kriesman confirmed that based on the central location of the tomb within the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the team believes the people inside were commissioned for burial there by inhabitants of prominent social standing. Who were they? Were they royal family members? Were they priests? Were they senior officials of the Nabataean trade empire? The answers to those questions are currently sitting in a specialized laboratory where the skeletal remains are being analyzed. Scientists are examining the teeth, the bones, the chemical traces locked into the enamel by the water and food these people consumed as children, traces that act as a permanent record of where a person grew up, what they ate, and what kind of physical labor they performed throughout their lives. The bones themselves can reveal whether these people had diseases, injuries, or conditions that give clues about their daily existence. And the most potentially transformative analysis is still pending. As of 2026, the team is awaiting official authorization for ancient DNA analysis of the remains. If that authorization comes through, and if the DNA has been preserved well enough to extract, which is not guaranteed in a desert environment, even with sandstone's moisture-absorbing properties, the results could be extraordinary. Ancient DNA can tell scientists whether the 12 individuals were related to each other. It can tell them how the Nabataeans as a population related to other ancient peoples of the Middle East, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. It can potentially answer the question that has lingered over Nabataean studies for generations. Where exactly did these people originally come from, and how did they become the civilization that carved Petra? The excavation itself is continuing. Kriesman confirmed in 2026 that the current excavation season is focused on expanding the investigated area around the chamber. And here's the detail that makes this story even bigger than it already is. The ground-penetrating radar survey did not find just one anomaly beneath the Treasury Plaza. It found multiple signatures. According to Kriesman, there are indications of other possible chambers beneath various points of the site. In parallel, there are indications of adjacent tombs not yet excavated. The team is applying ground-penetrating radar on a large scale across still unmapped areas of the wider site. What this means is that the 12 skeletons found so far may be only the beginning. The chamber that stunned the archaeology world when it was revealed may be one of several chambers that have been sitting sealed beneath Petra for 2,000 years. A 2025 partnership signed between the American Center of Research and Iconem, a French technology company, has initiated complete three-dimensional digital documentation of Petra using photogrammetry, laser scanning, and LiDAR technology. The goal is to create a full digital twin of the entire site for preservation and for research purposes that can continue long after any given excavation season ends. The Department of Antiquities of Jordan is also evaluating the possibility of a controlled opening of the discovered chamber for public viewing. If that happens, visitors to Petra could potentially stand in front of the Treasury and look into the space beneath it, where 12 Nabataeans have rested since before the Roman Empire took control of their city. And that brings us to the broader story of Petra, because the mystery of the Treasury and the mystery of the tomb beneath it exist within an even larger mystery. Only about 15% of Petra has ever been excavated. 15%. The rest is still underground, still buried, still unknown. In 2016, satellite imagery revealed an entirely unknown massive monument within Petra that no one had ever documented. A platform measuring approximately 56 meters by 49 meters with columns along one side, confirmed by pottery fragments to be over 2,150 years old. It was found not by digging, not by a survey team on the ground, but by satellite images being analyzed from space. A monument the size of a city block, hidden beneath the sand of a site that had been under archaeological investigation for over 200 years. Petra is not a finished story. It is an ongoing one. The city that the Nabataeans built from the 4th century BCE onward, carving channels and pipes and settling basins and storage tanks into the rock to manage water in a desert canyon, constructing buildings that aligned with the sun during solstices and equinoxes, so precisely that researchers now believe several monuments functioned as ancient astronomical calendars, housing a population at their peak of perhaps 30,000 people in a place that the geography of its entrance made nearly impregnable. This city is still surrendering its secrets one chamber at a time. The Nabataeans who built it eventually saw their kingdom absorbed by the Roman Empire in 106 CE. Trade routes shifted. The city's importance slowly diminished. A catastrophic earthquake in 551 CE caused serious damage to what remained of the active city. Over time, Petra became what historians called the Lost City, forgotten by the outside world until Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, disguised as a pilgrim, entered the Sec in 1812 and emerged to find the Treasury standing exactly as it had been built, undisturbed, the rose-red facade still intact after more than 1,000 years of abandonment. The world's rediscovery of Petra happened little more than 2 centuries ago. 2 centuries of excavation have uncovered 15% of what is there. 85% is still waiting. The 12 people in the chamber beneath the Treasury waited 2,000 years for a machine to find them and a team of scientists to open the room they were in. They had been there through the Roman annexation of the Nabataean kingdom, through the Byzantine era, through the medieval period, through the Ottoman Empire, through the Crusades, through Lawrence of Arabia, through Indiana Jones filming on the facade directly above them, through millions of tourists walking across the ground above their heads and taking photographs of the building their own civilization had constructed. They were there the entire time. Kriesman said something when the chamber was open that has stayed with anyone who heard it. He said people think they know Petra. They recognize the Treasury. But all these people walk by, and there's so much more under our feet. That observation is not just about Petra. It is about the relationship between what we can see and what is actually there. It is about a city that has been stared at and photographed and studied for 200 years and is still mostly underground and unknown. It is about the Nabataeans who built it, a civilization that controlled trade between 3 continents, that engineered water systems in a desert that still impress hydrologists today, that carved monuments aligned with the astronomical calendar into solid sandstone cliffs, and whose actual physical remains have been so absent from the archaeological record that the discovery of 12 complete skeletons in one chamber is described as the most significant tomb find in 2 centuries of work at the site. The analysis of those 12 people is ongoing right now. The DNA authorization is pending. The 2026 excavation season is expanding the search area. More chambers have been suggested by the radar data, and somewhere beneath the most photographed facade in the Middle East, whatever comes next, is still in the ground, still sealed, still waiting for a machine to find the shape of it in the dark, and a team of scientists to come and look. The Nabataeans kept their secrets well. They built their most important structures in places designed to be difficult to reach and difficult to read. The Treasury has been stared at for 200 years, and nobody knew what was underneath it until a flood management survey pointed a radar at the ground in 2024. There could be chambers beneath other parts of the site that the current surveys have not covered. There could be answers to questions about Nabataean origins, Nabataean burial practices, Nabataean genetic history, and Nabataean social structure buried within reach of any ground-penetrating radar unit pointed at the right patch of desert. 85% of Petra is still underground. 12 people have already changed what we know. What the other 85% holds is a question that the 2026 excavation season is only beginning to answer.